Thank you guys for coming this morning. This is the first formal CrossFit and endurance athlete or endurance in the CrossFit athlete, the opposite of what I usually teach. So we're gonna talk a little bit about energy systems this morning. This is gonna be a 3-part series. So today we're gonna talk about your energy systems and talk about a little bit how we manipulate those systems and work through those systems and what it means from a coach's perspective to get you in the right place when it comes to your endurance. The second session, we're gonna do a workout and we're gonna talk about pacing, everybody's favorite part, especially CrossFitters. I'm gonna talk a little bit about the first time I actually heard a CrossFit person say, I'm just gonna hold on for this workout. I'm gonna go out hard, I'm gonna hold on. And me coming from an endurance background, not understanding what it meant, what do you mean you're gonna hold on? I've never heard that before. I've never tried to hold on to a run before or a bike before. Talk a little bit about that and what that actually looks like when somebody tries to hold on, and what they may be telling themselves it's not actually happening when they're holding on. And then the third one, we're going to talk a little bit, we're going to go a little bit more in depth in nutrition and how nutrition plays a role in fueling somebody that is trying to be a CrossFit endurance athlete or just an endurance athlete in general or a CrossFit athlete in general, how they can play with the numbers a little bit depending on what type of workout it is and how pacing affects that, okay? So we'll talk a little bit about that today. We talk about lactate and all this great stuff that comes into play when it comes to endurance, comes to CrossFit, so on and so forth, okay? So all you guys know me. I'm Mike, endurance coach here. A little bit about my background really quick. I come from a triathlon background, so I started triathlon 9 years ago, roughly. I was a runner before I was a triathlete. Got really kind of into running when I was in college. It was more of a coping mechanism for me than anything, and I just picked up the miles, and it went from there. And so a healthy coping mechanism, right? Eventually, it got to a point where maybe it was a little bit too much. But, and then picked up triathlon shortly thereafter, about 4 years later. I was like, wait a minute, I can run, and I can swim, and I can bike too. I'm gonna do this instead. So I got into triathlon short course first, so I was sprint and Olympic distance triathlete, and then after that, I decided that I wanted to go a little bit longer because I was a long distance runner. So I got into Ironman 70.3 distance, started training Ironman distance, and that's kind of where I'm at right now with my triathlon. I raced for CU for 2 years. I was the oldest person on the team at 29 years old, so that was great. A lot of fun to race with those young guns though and go out there and push and not hold on for the race. So it's been a great time learning endurance and teaching endurance, and you know, this is kind of my lifeblood and what I love to be here teaching and doing, and I'm glad that you guys are here with me today so I can start sharing this information to you. Okay, so today we're going to talk about energy systems. We're all sitting here right now and we're all using an energy system. Most of us were just working out as well, and we're all using an energy system. What energy system do you think you're using right now? If you knew what an energy system would be? You're anaerobic right now. You just came out the workout. You might be anaerobic right now. Yes, I love it. So we're aerobic right now. Whether we believe it or not, we're still aerobic at a sitting pace, if you will, okay? You're burning energy here while you're sitting. You're burning energy daily. The daily activities that you do burn energy in some way, shape, or form. Usually we don't see something as exercise, especially when we're in an exercise environment, until we start to breathe heavily or feel like we can't catch our breath. That usually is what defines exercise to us, but any type of movement can literally be exercise. So when we measure exercise or we measure any type of workout, we measure it in 3 ways, in 3 qualities specifically for endurance, okay? We measure intensity, or pace, or there's many variables here that we would use to measure with. So intensity, pace, we measure volume or load, and rest, okay? Those are the 3 things that we measure here in endurance, okay? So when we talk about intensity, okay, we talk about how hard are you going in this workout. Are you at a 10 On a scale of 1 to 10, are you at a 3 on a scale of 1 to 10? Pace, am I going 10 miles an hour while I'm running per se, or am I going 3 miles an hour while I'm jogging? What did you say? Okay, that's what we're talking about when we talk about intensity. When we talk about volume and load, am I working out for 30 minutes, or am I working out for 5 minutes or 7 minutes? 18.5. It was a 7-minute workout versus the first workout, 18.1, which was 20 minutes, I do believe. Correct me if I'm wrong. So we talk about volume and load there. Load also being, is it 200 pounds or is it 100 pounds that I'm moving across some type of spectrum of movement here, okay? And then rest. And this is the thing I'm going to touch on the most today, okay? When we talk about these 3 qualities, they all fold into endurance, they all fold into CrossFit. And that's kind of how your programming is made, okay? So with the rest, this is the interval that you're not at the intensity, right? Or the volume or load that you're at during the main set or the main stimulus that you're trying to activate, right? This is when you're waiting for your partner to finish. This is when you're doing a jog. This is when you're on the bike or doing something at a lower intensity to build these to be better, okay? Now let me explain a little bit further. So when we talk about endurance, endurance is movement at a sustainable, so across time, sustainable pace, volume, distance, and intensity, okay? So you're in these categories and intensity, all 4 of these categories, and you're maintaining those for a specified period of time, okay? That is your endurance. That endurance can be 1 minute, that endurance can be 7 minutes, that endurance can be 15 minutes, okay? It's gonna vary based on what your workout is, right? So we want to build in these pace, volume, distance, and intensities so you're able to handle them each in variation, if you will, okay? And so knowing this, we want to maximize this because we want to be sustainable, right? We want to be able to rest to be sustainable. A good example I like to use of this. So I had a runner once, and she's a really good long distance runner, but she wasn't good at rest. Let's just say that, okay? She wanted to go hard all the time, even though she was a distance runner. And that caught up with her really fast, burned her out. We'll talk more about that in part 3 of this, and burnout and how that can occur, and with the pacing piece as well, with nutrition. But so we would go out on the track, right? And she would just kind of gun it right off the bat on every set of intervals that we would do. And we would usually do, because she was a long distance runner, we do longer intervals, 800s. You know, we get her on a track, she'd go around 800, and then we take a recovery lap. You know, we try to do easy 400 or something like that. But she was always wanting to go faster than what I was giving her on those 400s. I'd be judging her pace and be like, okay, we're going too fast, we need to bring it down. Okay, I know. Okay, man, I'm gonna clock her again. She'd come back around. She'd fly around that track. 400, you're still going too fast on that 400. We need to bring it down. We need to get you better at resting, because now she gets to her third 800 and I see her pace start to decline. Now her 800s are not consistent. She's burning out her rest is what she's doing. So she's going too high on that rest interval, and then she's not able to recover to hit that 800, which is what we're looking for here, to make that 800 hit the same exact time, okay? What we see in CrossFit is the rest is a big deal too, that a lot of people fail to have adequate rest as they move between movements, okay? So say you're going from a deadlift into a box jump, okay? That's a pretty tricky movement, right? Because you're working 2 very similar muscle groups, but one is explosive and one is strength-based, right? So when you move from one to the next, a lot of people will find that their legs they can't handle the load very well on their legs if they don't have good rest in between, right? So what we try to do as coaches is build the rest, build the strength in the rest, okay? So we're gonna come back to this. Some things that I want to talk about today, and keep this rest in mind the whole day, okay? When we talk about lactate and lactate threshold and what's going on in your legs, we'll use that deadlift example, okay? So we'll use that deadlift box jump example. What's going on in your legs when you move into those from one motion to the next, okay? And we'll talk about how to build the rest out of that and how we would be able to make an adaptation to move straight from one to the other and not worry about that tiredness in the legs as you go from that pulling motion into that jumping motion, okay? So one of the things I want to address first is LT, and that's lactate threshold, okay? Lactate. A lot of people will hear coaches walk around and say, you're burning, or you're slowing down because lactic acid this, lactic acid that. Well, it's not lactic acid, okay? Like lactic acid is a byproduct of what's going on, but it's the lactate in your blood that's having the issue more than anything, okay? Lactate is a product of energy production. So when your body's producing this energy while you're going through your workout, right? Lactate starts to be produced through an energy system, an energy cycle. You have something called ATP, adenosine triphosphate, which is energy. It's being converted all the time while you're working out, right? It's being converted over and over and over again. Well, there are byproducts to this while it's being converted. It's giving off all sorts of stuff. Lactate happens to be one of those things that builds up in your blood while it's giving off this energy, right? The lactate is used to be recycled. So it goes into your blood, it recycles, turns back into energy, and then again is outputted lactate again. So you're constantly going through lactate, and you're trying to process lactate. There's always some level of lactate in your blood. It's usually when you start to get to an anaerobic state. I didn't put anaerobic up there, but I will. When you start to get towards kind of your high end of where your muscles are conditioned for, that you start to get that feeling of lead leg or lead arms, where it's like, oh my gosh, I'm trying to go the same pace, but for some reason, I feel like I'm just carrying lead right now, right? Well, lactate has built up in your blood in a specific area, most likely. So we'll go back to our deadlift and squat or box jump, okay? So here I've done a bunch of deadlifts for strength, and then I move into a box jump, and I feel like there's bricks in there when I jump up onto the box, right? Well, that's because lactate has built up in your legs, and your body's trying to process it, okay? So your body processes lactate not in one specific area. So, because it's in your bloodstream, right? So it starts packing it away in all these little areas and all the muscles. It's trying like, okay, how can I clear out the bloodstream? How can I clear it out? Well, it's built up in the muscles, so it's like, okay, now I got to get it somewhere else. So it starts sending it through the rest of your system too. Okay, like I can store it in the arms. I can put it up in your arms. That's why you start to recover so quickly when you stop using your legs, because it's able to flush it elsewhere and use it there for energy, and then you get your legs back, right? So taking that rest time allows that lactate to flush out. Now, a way that we can manipulate that to happen and maybe get it into another area quicker is to do something between those deadlifts and those box jumps, okay? So when we talk about rest and improving your rest, we do something called, we can do a lactate tolerance or a lactate clearance type of workout. Now, William, I've done a lactate clearance workout with you actually. So last week, William and I did, well actually, yeah, it was last week, last Thursday. We did a row, a bike, and a squat, right? So we rode for 500 meters at a nice, easy, moderate pace to keep ourselves aerobic. We went into the bike for 20 calories, all out. So William was just busting out on the bike as fast as he could go. My purpose was to build the lactate up in his legs. I wanted him to feel what it felt like to slow down, for that to build up, to hurt, you know, because, and we'll talk about pain in a little bit too, and hazard scores, and how that affects you, because, you know, pain is actually an emotion. We treat it in psychology as an emotion rather than an actual thing that's happening to you, your body's response to something that it may not like, right? So we'll talk more about that later, perceived pain versus actual pain, what that means. But essentially, what we do is we build up that lactate in his legs, and then I had him come off of the bike, and then I had him perform air squats at a very, very easy pace. So what we were trying to stimulate was not only for him to feel what having that lactate in there was, but also to clear it from his legs up to his arms by doing some nice, easy, steady movements. He practiced his rest, essentially. He was still moving through a motion, very similar, where we have hip flexion to the bike, into something where he had hip flexion into a squat, right? So we were manipulating the movement to be able to accommodate the rest. We're training his rest. Does that make sense? So when you can train the rest, you can train the athlete to rest better and become stronger. There was an example that was really good from Chris Henshaw that I heard at his seminar a few weeks ago, and he was talking about handstand push-ups. So we worked with a gentleman that had handstand push-ups like you wouldn't believe. This guy could bust out 102 minutes. But Chris came in and said, okay, why can't you do it in 1 minute and 30 seconds? Where's the problem? How are you breaking this up? How are you, manipulating these handstand push-ups to get them in? He said, well, I do about 10 of them. For the first set's usually about 50, and then I stop, and then I do 10-second break, and I do 10 more. It's 10-second break, I do 10 more, and that's how he breaks it up to get to that 2 minutes. And he could do 100 in that time frame. But he's like, well, how long are you, so you're resting 10 seconds in between, huh? And he's like, yeah. And he's like, well, why don't we utilize that time? Why can't we break that down to 7 seconds? Why can't we get you resting 7 seconds? Because over time, out of the number of sets you do, we can get you down to 1 minute 30 if we're able to break that rest in. So what he had him do to practice that lactate clearance is he would have him do those handstand push-ups the same way, but after he came off the mat, he'd have him grab a PVC pipe. This is very similar to the squat that William and I did, and press that PVC pipe overhead. Very light load. We have a very, very light load, but we're adding volume. There's no intensity or pace here, but we're building the rest at the same time. So we've taken one of these qualities, we've taken the rest, actually 2 of them, and the volume, and we've increased his volume by having him do a PVC pipe. Nobody said that it has to be hard, but this is gonna help him flush that lactate out of his arms, send it down, because he's still moving, right? We're still moving through this motion. Allow him to flush it out, and then he can recover better. So over time, in doing that, he did. He started dropping his times because his rest got better, okay? We see that on the track just the same, and that's what we had to pay attention to on the track. So when I talk about the 1 mile here in a second, we'll talk about pacing a little bit. We'll touch on pacing today, but not get too in-depth about it. So what we need to do as CrossFit athletes to build our endurance or be able to make the sustainable pace, intensity, etc., is build in that rest, make that rest better. So we're not working so hard and then resting so much, so we can continuously move, get more rounds, get a better time, so on and so forth. We're not burning out, we're not holding on, which we'll talk about again here in a little bit, okay? So some key terms today. Lactate, now we kind of know what that is. That's the stuff that builds up in your legs. It's good though, because we use it for energy, we need it for energy. Aerobic, what we're doing right now when we're just moving, we're using oxygen. Aerobic, all it stands for is using oxygen for your energy, okay, to develop your energy. Aerobic threshold will be the top of that, and we'll explain this probably in the second part a little bit more when we talk about the mountain of aerobic activity, okay? VO2 max. You'll see in your packets here in a little bit, we'll talk a little more about VO2 max, but VO2 max is essentially the hardest you can go. That's the top of your mountain per se. You know what, I'll just go ahead and explain this now. So when we talk about the mountain of fitness here, okay, here we think about this like, what's a mountain? What's a mountain range that somebody knows the distance of? I think, isn't Everest 29 something, 29,209 or something like that feet, okay? Let's call this your VO2 max. It's the highest point in the world, right? The highest point from ground level up, okay? So this is like your VO2 max. That's your highest point. That's the most that you can achieve as far as oxygen uptake goes, okay? It's essentially what it stands for, is your maximal oxygen uptake. How much you can take in and still be able to function. Doesn't mean it's gonna feel good. This is gonna hurt really bad. Has anybody ever done a VO2 max test in here? Okay, what they essentially do is they stick you on a treadmill. It's like you're a little, hamster on a treadmill type deal here. They hook a mask onto you, and then they make you start running, right? And you'll go at a certain pace, and they'll keep time frames as you go along, okay? You'll run at a steady pace, and then that pace starts to increase. Well, not only does that pace start to increase over time, but they also increase the grade that you're running on, okay? So it keeps going up and up while pace is going up and up at the same time, till eventually you can't go any longer. They literally test you to failure. So you're just running, and then boom, till failure, exactly. And then a lot of times too, they'll take your blood and they'll test your lactate. They'll see where it's at to see what levels you have on there. And so it's kind of miserable, but you can get some really good readings from it to tell you so many things about where your VO2 max is and where you are aerobically. So once we know your VO2, we can also establish other things from there. Why they test your metabolic rate as well is so they can see where your lactate threshold is, which is the part that we can get to, or that part where we start to burn. It's a lot easier to get to your lactate threshold mentally or in a workout than it is to get to your VO2 max. You're probably not going to reach your VO2 max. You'll be able to stay there for 7 seconds maybe, and that's it, okay? So the second level here is going to be your lactate threshold, okay? So when we talk about lactate threshold, where you feel that lactate come in and try to stop you from getting here, where that VO2 max is, okay? Are these trainable? Absolutely. These can absolutely be trained, both of these. What William and I were doing with that lactate threshold clearance type work, we're training his lactate threshold. When we're doing those hard bouts for short periods of time, we're training our lactate threshold and our VO2 as well if we're doing really high intensity controlled environment workouts here, okay? So we can increase the size of this mountain. So, but before we get there, we also have down here our aerobic threshold, or a point where we start to go anaerobic, okay? So this is our slow and steady pace. Our slow and steady pace stays right down here at kind of the lower part of our mountain where there's lower energy being taken, right? When you see people hike to the top of a mountain, you can see how exhausting and how stressful that is on their body, right? Compared to when they're at base camp, which is a little bit lower. Their body's still working, but it's not working at an accelerated rate like it is when they get to the top, right? So what we would do, and there's so many ways to do this, and we'll talk a lot more about this in pacing, is we can increase this mountain. We can increase the foundation with endurance, okay? With building in endurance workouts. We're hitting these sections multiple times. Now, these can get close together, these can get close together, but in order to make everything come up together, we have to increase the height of the mountain. If we can increase VO2, we can bring everything else up with it, okay? If we have a good foundation, a solid mountain foundation here, we can start to increase that VO2 and bring everything else up. This is the area, when we talk about rest, that we want to be able to control the most, okay? When we talk about learning your rest, we want to learn how to be able to come in and out of here multiple times and be able to control this when we're in it, okay? Because that's what we do in CrossFit. We go from a really high intensity movement for, say, yesterday we did kettlebell swings, right? And then we did row, and then we went right into double unders right after the row. Those were two really cardiac movements, right, that we moved into. So we essentially, even though we were supposed to be at 75 to 80%, we went from here on the rower to here on the jumps, double unders, right, and back down. Most people, that's how they condition. Here to here, and then we would go back and forth and back and forth. We get to a strength movement, we jump in between. Well, we want to be really efficient at jumping in between those so we can just move from one to the next. So we have to train the threshold, and we have to train the aerobic threshold, or excuse me, the lactate threshold and the aerobic threshold, so they work in unison together, okay? So that they can be in and out, in and out, in and out, and be okay? And that VO2 is kind of like the marker of all above. So if you look in your packet here at this first little portion, you'll see the energy sources, percentage of energy production and contribution of energy over time. Now, we're going to talk specifically about your aerobic and your anaerobic system here, okay? And you'll see in this little chart that over time, your aerobic systems shift, right? They go from being anaerobic in this picture all the way to aerobic as you go on over time, right? The systems shift. Our anaerobic system, and you'll see a little, I may have inserted this chart on the 4th page, 5th page, we'll talk about that in a second. You'll see that your aerobic system is meant for the long haul, and the anaerobic system is meant for the short haul, right? It gets us through those short bouts. So when we talk about, let's talk about this in a mile, okay? In a running mile here. We've done some pacing workouts before. So when you're running the mile, or 1,609 meters, there is 9 meters on there. So when you look at a track, right, there's those markers on the track that a lot of people don't pay much attention to. You just go out and run. It's 4 laps, right, to go out and run on a track. Well, actually, there's very specific markers, and you'll see these 2 markers separate from each other on the end of a track. You'll have like a flat marker and then sometimes a little bit of a slanted marker here. That's your 1,600 or your 400, and then your 1,609, or that 9 extra meters that's tacked on there for the finish of the race, okay? So that's the difference between those 2 lines. So we're doing track workouts this summer. You guys will know, and we'll go over it to have you see where that actually is, okay? So when we're running around the track, we tap into some energy systems. Now let's talk about the untrained athlete. Let's talk about the one that goes out there and is like, all right, I'm gonna do my mile, I'm just gonna go, because I'm not gonna warm up. Why would I warm up? I'm a runner, I don't warm up, or I'm a CrossFit athlete. We don't have to, do that. We're just gonna go, that's the worst thing amongst runners, is they don't warm up. We just like to take off. I was guilty of that for a long time, where we just strap on the shoes and out the door, right? So we're on the track, right, and then we just take off. So say we run our first lap in, I don't know, let's come up with the numbers, 400 meters, 60 seconds, okay? Let's say we run that first lap, 60 seconds. Okay, great. And I'm an untrained athlete, so that was good, that was hard. But I have 3 more laps to go. So my second one, 72. Okay, I'm slowing down, coming down now, but I got 2 more laps to go, right? I'm holding on. Before I know it, I'm at 80 on my next one. Gosh, this is way hard, and I have 1 lap to go. But you know what? There's that extra kick that we usually get in that last part. Everybody kicks it up in the end, right? Like when we do these CrossFit workouts. In our last minute, when the coach says, go, like get what you can, for some reason we find that we can elevate our level a little bit, right? That we weren't at for the last 10 minutes. There's an extra little physical and emotional boost that we give ourselves, right? So you know what? I came back down to 76. Wow, that's all over the place. When we talk about pacing, these numbers that's a yo-yo right there. You are 20 seconds difference between 60 and 80. When you think about if you were to go out there and pace yourself too, which lap do you think you would be most likely to slow down on? Say there's 10 laps here, okay? Say we're gonna go 10 laps. How many of you would feel like your pace started dropping, or you would tell yourself, oh, this is hard at 1? 2? 2? So we got 2 people for 2? 3? 3? 4? 4? 5? 6? 7? 7? There we go. 8? Elise is in between. 9? 10? This is what we find, is that most people, about 3/4 through any workout or any type of running event per se, start to feel that little bit of dip, like, oh man, mentally, you're in your head saying, I'm almost there, but man, this is taking a while, It's not until that last stretch that you can kick it in and push a little bit, and that your new system kicks on at the same time, right? Because your energy has been restored, because you did slow down, most likely. So what happens? You replenish, you fill the tank a little bit more, and then you're able to give it that final kick, right? So what I have here is our bucket, our aerobic bucket, okay? So what we want to do, so obviously this person was probably anaerobic when they took off running, right? Our anaerobic system can hold on for about 75 seconds, 90 seconds, okay? So, and we'll talk more about that when we talk here, but that's about as long as it can hold on. So he or she was in that 60-second range, right? So they started slowing down. They hit it. They hit the wall, the anaerobic wall, right? What they did is they turned that spigot on. So we'll envision this as a bucket and our spigot. They turned that thing on full speed in the end. They fire hydranted that thing. Like they just opened it up and ripped loose, right? What they didn't have was an aerobic bucket to hold on to that. So they didn't have enough holes for that bucket to drain, essentially. So you can think about the aerobic system as being the drainage system, or to allow that water to come out here, okay? So you can continuously fill that bucket with the anaerobic system. At at a point, if your aerobic system is not trained or you don't have that capacity, you're just gonna keep filling this bucket and filling this bucket until all of a sudden it's overflowing and your body's just like, stop. What are you doing? Let's stop here. Let's slow down. Let's find our pace. Let me turn the spigot down a little bit. Let me take some of this away, okay? There, now I have more control and I'm at this level because this is where my aerobic level is, okay? So now I'm able to keep that bucket a little bit more under control. I'm not overflowing and I'm not slowing down, okay? Questions on that? Keep your spigots controlled, okay, everybody? All right, so when it comes to talking about these energy systems, we have 3 energy systems on here, okay, that work with our body. So when you kick on, when you start a workout, you're gonna feel great right off the bat, right? Because you're getting a tap of high energy. You have full stores right here, and this is what's called your PC system, if you will, okay? So phosphate creatine is what it stands for, but that's what you have available to use right off the bat, okay? And you have some ATP in there that's gonna fire off and be ready to go. So you're gonna feel awesome. This thing is full and ready to go, but you're only gonna feel awesome for about 7 to 10 seconds on that system, okay? So your body's gonna burn through it fast. It doesn't have a lot of it. It has it, it's explosive and it's useful. On a box jump, it's gonna use it. On something where you're doing the sprints, it's gonna use it, and it's gonna use it really, really quickly. So once you get through that 7 to 10 seconds, all of a sudden, your second system turns on. And this is your anaerobic system. I'm gonna say ANAE here, okay? Your anaerobic system, now that kicks on, and it's gonna hold on to you now, okay? So you may be like, okay, I can do this. This is sustainable. Now you're in a system that's converting right here. But again, we talked about that lactate, and now lactate is trying to keep up with you at the same time while we're in that anaerobic system, right? So the anaerobic system here is now, if we're sprinting, at 100%, okay? So we've gone 100% here. Now this one kicks on, and we're gonna go to about 90 seconds here, depending on the person's system, okay? This one's only gonna be able to hold on for about 90 seconds, so it's still gripping. Okay, we got this, we're good. We can still keep going at this 60-second 400, right? Nope. Because then, eventually, the aerobic system, which is not high energy like the other systems, it's a lot of energy. We have huge stores for it. You'll see in your packets, there's this area that talks about energy stores. I think it's like the 4th page. You'll see this area that talks about energy stores, and that one there, I think we got one more right here. That talks about muscle fibers, but you'll see towards the bottom of those type 1 muscle fibers, which is your aerobic muscle fibers, we'll talk a little bit more of that in a second. Those are the ones that are those long holding ones right here. They use fat for fuel, and fat takes a little while to turn over, right? Here we're using carbohydrates for fuel. Here we're using fat for fuel. So that system takes a little while to kick on, start generating an engine, right? And then get to where you need to be to start settling into something that's more comfortable for your body at a longer distance, okay? Which is trainable, very trainable. So here, this system is, how does that symbol go? Is almost infinite, okay? And how you can continue to move. Here, when you get here, these will start to restore too, once you've tapped them out. You can slow yourself down, bring yourself back, right? It's all about training these systems separately. Slow yourself down, bring yourself back, and then boom, hit it again. So, when we talk about workout and programming here, how would we change this guy, right? How would we keep him from going out and killing himself? Let's take an average there, okay? I want your first lap to be 65. I want it to be 65 seconds. I want it to be 1 minute and 5 seconds, essentially, okay? Bring it down. I know you're gonna feel like you're gonna wanna gun it at first, and that's great, but I want you to be able to finish strong instead of start strong and then hold on, right? So, first lap, second lap, let's go 65 again. Third lap, when you think you can't go faster, I know you have a little bit extra in your energy system because we pulled you back on those first couple of laps, right? So let's say 64 and then 63, okay? let's tap it that way instead, because we know on that last lap, you're gonna have a push at the end. So even if you start that last lap at a 65 again, I know you're gonna push a little bit and you can squeeze a couple of extra seconds out of that on the end, right? So now we look like we're accelerating rather than dying out. We all know that we can all accelerate at the end. Even if we don't have the fitness for it, we know we can do it because there's that psychological piece as well that we can bring into play to push a little bit harder. So now we're pacing those laps, we're using our systems efficiently. We can burn the system out once we get to the end instead of burning it out in the beginning, right? Make sense? All right, cool. All right, so when we talk about, where are we at here? When we talk about the 1 mile and efficiently building in the 1 mile, we can start to talk about rest again and how we would train the 1 mile to become faster, okay? No matter what your 1 mile is right now, I guarantee you that you can bring it down a minute to, for some, 3 to 4 minutes for your 1 mile by training your rest alone, okay? So by creating the stimulus, like we did with the PVC pipe, like we do with the squats, so on and so forth, we continue to train double unders. Double unders can be trained. You can train the rest of double unders by continuing the movement once you stop your double unders into single unders. You're still moving, you're still jumping, you're still getting the same stimulus. It's not as fast on the rope, so we've scaled back your intensity a little bit, but you're still working through the rest. You're going to improve the rest of your double unders if you're doing single unders in the time that you're not doing those double unders, okay? So you can play and manipulate that piece so you get better at those double unders, essentially, that you can keep your breath during the double unders as you move, okay? I'm gonna grab a drink of coffee here in a second, drying out a little bit. Everybody follow me so far? I know I'm just talking a lot here. All right, so training the mile. Essentially, we would want to train the same way. So what I would take you out there and do, we would say, all right, we're gonna run, let's say, I want you to do 400s, let's say in 60 seconds, okay? I want you to do a 400 in 60 seconds. So we're pushing the pace a little bit. We're training the intensity because I want you to get faster naturally. I don't know what each individual's variables are, but we'd always play with the variables to see where we need to make the improvement, because some people don't lack the speed, they lack the rest. Some people don't lack the rest, they lack the speed. Some people lack the volume. They just don't have enough volume. They don't have the muscular endurance to get there. That's what we train 1 day a week while we do some muscular stuff too for endurance. And I mean, here in CrossFit, you're always training muscular, but we train muscular endurance so you can carry for that longer period of time as well. So you're not burning out or fizzling out because of a muscular issue. You may feel like my breath is there, my energy is there. We have these workouts all the time where your breath is there, your energy is there, but you're like, where are my muscles? I just can't push through this workout. I just feel weak today, right? You may be overtrained in the muscular portion too, or not enough, or you don't have that muscular endurance to make it through that workout. So we train the muscular endurance over time to get you there, to make sure all of that is fixed, so you're built up and ready to go when it comes to something like this, okay? So we might say 60 seconds, or let's break it down this way. Let's do a 400, but let's do 300 and 100. So I want you to jog 300 below really slow pace here. I mean, if I caught you doing more than a jog, hey, let's bring it down, And then we do a sprint on 15 seconds. So we say we do a 100 sprint, 15 seconds, and then you jog immediately after that, okay? So we did that sprint way faster than this here. We have the ability to do so. We have the systems to be able to do that, so we can manipulate those systems to build that speed in. But then we bring you down and we jog you. So we stimulate the nervous system to feel what it feels like to have speed, and we bring you down, recover you. We're recovering and we're moving at the same time. And we may do 6, 7 sets of that, where we bring you up, and then we bring you down. We bring you up, and then we bring you down. Something else that I see kind of on topic with this is that we don't train the system enough when we're trying to prepare for something. So we talked about just going out and being ready for a run, right? Like, I'm already ready for this. I'm just gonna go out and I'm gonna do it. Or when we go to the track, like, I'm just gonna run this mile. I'm just here to run this mile. But we need to warm that up. We need to tell these systems here, I need you to be available when I ask for you today. So when we go out and we do these track workouts, and it's important to, whatever your purpose for the day is, say your purpose is to build speed, so we're doing these 100 and then 300s, we need to do a couple of quick sprints, maybe 30 meters or 40 meters, to fire up these two systems, to let them know, and to let your nervous system know, hey, I'm gonna use you today. Like I need you, once that first one starts, to fire off for me. If you're training your aerobic system, if you're doing 800s that day, you need to get some strides in. You need to do 400 or 500 meters to turn the aerobic system on, because it'll literally take that 90 seconds. So it'll literally take that 90 seconds for that aerobic system to turn on. It won't turn itself on automatically. It'll wait and say, oh, you need me? Here I am. And then the wheels start turning. And that's why we feel that dip, and then it picks in. And then we're like, oh, you know when you feel that runner's high? That's when that aerobic system is fluid. When you get in there, yes.
Can that time vary drastically for athletes?
Not really. It doesn't vary too much. Now the intensity level will be different for athletes to get them there. Some people will be at a 4.5 minute pace to get there. Some people will be at a 12.5 minute pace to get there. So that does vary by athlete, and kind of on this gauge right here of where their maxes are across range, which we'll talk about a little bit in the pacing section too. So this is why this aerobic curve looks like this, okay? These energy systems are what cause this to happen when we go from anaerobic to aerobic here. And you'll see this nice little current model that we have at distance. You'll see these are percentages on this little chart below. So for the 400 meter, you'll see what percentage of system you're using there, whether it be anaerobic or aerobic. For the 800, what we see is the percentages of what people use at max effort there. 1500, and you'll just see as we go more towards the marathon that the aerobic system just keeps kicking in and taking over, which again, you see some of these runners, right? You watch the Boston Marathon, it's amazing. They're running 5-minute miles, but that's their aerobic system. That's what they've trained this to be able to hold on to, right? To be able to, to be able to carry that for a long period of time. That's where their aerobic system is. I didn't put the one in here. I'll show you guys next time. Oh, it's like the second to the last here. This VO2 max results from elite marathon runners. And here you'll see their VO2 maxes. Some great people here. Alberto Salazar, great runner, was the first one to kind of break that 210 threshold here. But you'll see their VO2 maxes relative to each other are all pretty much the same, but you'll also see how there's some variability for how fast they can run. This system is trained. They have really high mountains to be able to do a marathon in just over 2 hours, okay? That VO2 max, their lactate threshold is way up here compared to just your everyday runner, right? So we want to train those systems. We want to do lactate threshold runs. That's why we program these 100s, 200s, 400s, so on and so forth. Each one has a different purpose, of course, because when we look at that chart, we see which system we're using, right? Anaerobic, aerobic, so on and so forth. Each has a different purpose, but all the purpose to keep building in to this mountain here, right? And you'll see that these elite runners are doing the same thing here, okay? Let's see here, I'm a little off packet here, but we're gonna go to, I'd like to show you guys. If you look here, I basically explained these systems. It was a nice little color chart, but I printed in black and white here for you guys. You'll see this is essentially what I was talking about here. I just, in a different method when we talked about filling up your cup, essentially, and what you have before it drains. These are the systems, and this is the energy as they go. ATP, CP is this first system, and then you'll see the second system is glycolysis. These are both kind of glycolysis, which just means your body's using sugar. It goes in, it grabs it from your muscle or in your bloodstream, and then it uses it immediately for energy is essentially what it does. And you have these big storage pockets as well called glycogen that it goes in and breaks down into glucose that it can use right away. So sugar, fat. More on that soon. So I think that's my phone actually making that chiming noise. And you can just hit stop if you'd like to. Thank you. And we talked about the 1 mile piece right there. Now we're going to talk a little bit about muscle fibers, okay? So with that, slow twitch, fast twitch muscle fibers, okay? And that's kind of where we get into energy systems too. Slow twitch muscle fibers are those long aerobic fibers that we train. Those ones are they're deep red in color. They're there for us when we need them. They're your sitting muscles. They're the ones that help you hold your posture. They're the ones that help you walk every day, so on and so forth. Those are your aerobic or your type 1 muscle fibers. Type 2 and there's type 2A, type 2B, there's type 2X as well, which is kind of like this hybrid between type 2A and B that we have. But as those muscle fibers go from 2 to 1, they progressively get slower in how they react. Now, it's great when we talk about that deadlift. That deadlift, you're actually using type 1 in a lot of cases for that deadlift, right? But once we go to that box jump, boom, now we're type 2, we're explosive. This is a muscle that can only last for a few seconds, actually. That's why you notice once we get to a certain point on the box jumps, it becomes more like, instead of an up and down, it's more like a step down, recover, back up, step down, recover, back up, right? Because we're losing some of that explosiveness and we're losing some of this energy here. Again, we can train that to rise as well. But what you'll see here is slow muscles, fast muscles, sugary muscles, non-sugary muscles, and that's essentially how this whole system works together, okay? When you're out there on the run too, when we talk about energy systems and you hit this aerobic pace, you'll notice you slow down a bit, but you know what? Those slow twitch are on and they can carry you just like that energy system can. The muscle will feed off of triglycerides or fat, essentially, to fuel. And we've got, the average person has over 300,000 calories to be able to burn for fat. So we can go for a long time. That's why you hear some of these like survival stories too, people that can be out in the wilderness without food and all this kind of stuff for such long periods of time, because their aerobic system is just being used the whole time. They're not exerting a lot of energy. Their body goes into a very safe state, and what they do is they just feed off of that energy source, slow and steady over a long period of time. So really interesting on that end. And this, again, we talked about VO2 max already. Oxygen consumption relative to exercise intensity. We'll eventually hit that plateau. VO2 is our plateau. That is where we stop being productive, essentially, and everything starts to shut down. That's where we can't get any more oxygen. So our body says, nope, I need it now, so I'm gonna bring you down, I'm gonna slow you down, okay? Just really quickly through this, you can see here that there's a difference too with with these two athletes. So this is just showing two athletes that have a different VO2 in what they're able to accomplish. So you'll see running speed and the association with what they can achieve with their O2 uptake, and that those who have a higher VO2 are able to move faster because everything on this mountain is a little bit higher. Essentially, it's a higher level of fitness. We can look at this on a fitness spectrum. It's a higher level of fitness, okay? And a sprinter versus runner, you can almost guess the difference in the systems that they use here. They're really almost two completely different sports, and when we talk about CrossFit, and we're gonna talk this a lot more in the next session, and CrossFitters being we're not long distance, we're not sprinters, we're in between. We're the okayest at both of those things, right? But that's the purpose, is that CrossFitters are good across all these spectrums, that they can be not masters of anything, but really good at all these things at once, right? So training the run the same way, where we're not sprinters versus runners like runners and sprinters are trained, that we're trained specifically for the intensities and the movements that CrossFit give us. The great thing about the run is that there's a lot of specificity in the amount of time. So CrossFit's a quick sport too, right? Essentially. So training the run to specificity, and something we'll talk more about, training the run to specificity, because it gives you the biggest bang for your buck, and there's a lot of archetypes that we use in CrossFit that are relatable to the run when it comes to knee and hip flexion, extension, movements that we're in, exploding outward, right? Explosive movements that we use in and around the gym. So we can use stuff like the row, bike, run, so on and so forth to put us in some of those shapes and forms. In the swim for recovery and training the aerobic system, I can't tell you how how great swimming is to be off the joints and be training these systems at the same time. So you get that steady increase. The specificity is to train those systems to be able to feel the intensities, right? So specificity in and of itself is just us training specifically for what it is we want to achieve, right? So this is what we do as coaches, especially at an individual level, is we set up your training essentially to say, this is where I see you at, this is what you need to improve, so this is what your workouts are gonna be focused on. And it may be one focus. If you're really bad at volume, we're gonna train volume. Jason Khalifa, back when he hired Chris Henshaw, was running 0 to none. And I think one of the longest runs he did before the games, like 5 years ago, he did a 20-mile run just before the games because volume was what held him back, right? So he went out, and imagine this big guy, 250 pounds or whatever, just out there running 20 miles, but he didn't have the capacity. He had to build that capacity in, right? Because that was his weakness. That's what he needed specificity for. Rich Froning, his weakness, the rest. He had to build in his rest. He had to get better at resting. He was pausing too much, taking too much time. Even though he was at the top of the game, he could have been better, So when we talk about those professional athletes and what they can do better, there's always room for improvement. There's always room to improve these variables, whether it be rest, volume, distance, time, intensity, pace, you name it, okay? And then if we look towards the back here, you'll see this nice little readout. Now, I think this is a great way to kind of sum up a lot of this that we talked about. And this is an actual VO2 test. I actually stole Chris Henshaw's VO2 test for this one, okay? And you'll see a bunch of numbers here, right? It's really confusing to start off with. But you'll see that these columns are numbered 1, 2, 3, and 4. And that's where we're really gonna pay attention, okay? So you'll see the time, and the time on the side here is only the time of the test. It's like how long the test was progressing. So remember what we talked about in the beginning, a VO2 max test is an increasing angle and an increasing speed, okay? So they're going to try and find out where you break. And also they're going to try and find out, and what we'll talk more about on our third session, is where your nutrition switches to, where your body switches from carbohydrates or from fat to carbohydrates completely, okay? So there'll be this amount of time where you're breathing out a certain amount of our CO2, so on and so forth. They're measuring this the whole time. They may measure lactate as well. You'll see them kind of break this down as you go until you cross over. So up here on this top box, you'll see the fat and carbohydrate crossover, okay? And you'll see a heart rate associated just to the side of that, okay? So you'll see 50, 51, 48, 52, 49, 52. That's where fat started to cross over. Because if you look all the way at the top, fat started at 60% and a 41% for carbohydrate. And then you'll see how they slowly switched as they went down, right? Until he turned into more carbohydrate than he did fat. And that's where that crossover, that's when he started to move towards that anaerobic range. That's when he started to really fill this cup, and the bucket started to fill up, okay? Because his holes started to get a little sealed there, okay? He had a lot of them, trust me. By these numbers, he had a lot of them, but that's where it started to seal. And you'll see the heart rate associated on the side. So that we start to burn a little bit more. For him was about 133, which is a very conditioned athlete. That's a really good heart rate to be at. And we can talk more about heart rate another time. And then on the bottom here, you'll see the fat carbohydrate switch over. And it's 165. He was at 0% fat and 100%. That's where he hit his threshold, was right there. In that point in time was where he switched completely over from his aerobic system to his anaerobic system, and then started pushing for that VO2 max. I think he only went a little bit longer after that. Yeah, he was at 4.57, so 17 minutes. You'll see down here at that 17-minute mark. It's got a little marker next to it, but really hard to see there. That's where he hit his ultimate, and you can see that the numbers were even negative at that point. So he was really trucking at that speed, okay? But that's where he hit his ultimate low. And so you can kind of see how nutrition could play a role too, right? How fueling our bodies to be able to achieve the stimulus we're looking for, if we're looking to increase our aerobic capacity, or if we're looking to increase our anaerobic capacity, how we would fuel ourselves to be able to do so. For a CrossFit athlete, per se, a high-fat diet might not be optimal, right? We need some carbohydrates because a lot of high intensity in these workouts, right? So we need to be able to fuel at a certain percentage to be able to achieve that optimal level all the time versus fat, which carries us for long periods of time, really low and slow, but we're not doing 20-mile runs here too at the same time, right? Our workout might be 15 minutes where we can tap in and out of the system and use the carbohydrates in and out of that system if we have good rest to be able to fuel ourselves for the workout, right? If we're talking about a performance perspective and gaining performance in CrossFit, we would learn how to associate between those two things, okay? And then you'll just see back here what we look at as average ranges. Now again, they vary for everybody, but average ranges for VO2 are on the backside. And again, it'd be very hard to test unless you're in a lab setting. What we can test and what we will test this summer, so all of you can come, is we're gonna test lactate threshold. We can test that by heart rate, the same as you can test it in a lab, because we can look at your times and your splits. So for example, something we do in triathlon, and this kind of goes to the hold on theory and how we snuff it out before it starts, is when we do lactate threshold testing, for example, a 70.3 or an Ironman athlete will go out and do 30 minutes, I even do this with my runners as well. We'll go 30 minutes as hard as you can. But I'm only gonna take the data from the last 20 minutes, okay? Because that first 10 minutes, I want you to get rid of this variability. I wanna snuff that out of the data. I don't wanna see that. I want you to go as hard as you can, and I want your body to settle into a threshold that you can manage for 20 minutes. So your lactate threshold is gonna tell me where your current level of fitness and your current level of pacing is. We can get a heart rate reading from it, and we can get a pace reading for it. And then what we do is we hold on to that heart rate and pace. So say we did a lactate threshold test, and you were able to carry 175 heart rate, right? So BPM, and let's say you were also able to carry what speed? Somebody give me a pace. What pace did you carry for that 20 minutes? 6:15? Okay, 175 at 6:15 per mile, okay? So this is your initial, and then we would institute a training program, right, to build this. And what we would look for during that training program is we would look for some type of divergence, okay? So I'm gonna say, okay, I want you to train at these specific zones. So I would say, Jake, you did it in 175, 615. So now, Jake, we're gonna start training you, we're gonna build your aerobic base, right? We're gonna build that aerobic piece a little bit. So I'm gonna have you run a bunch of runs at 8-minute miles, okay? But I'm gonna do longer distance for that. So let's say 5 miles at 8 minutes is what I would program for you every Monday, right? And then I wanna test that 6:15 too. I wanna test that threshold a little bit. So I'm gonna get you on the track, and we're gonna do 8 by 400 with 200 jog recoveries. Okay, we're gonna go do 8 by 400s, but we're gonna do those at a 5:40 pace, okay? On the run, when you're active, when you're doing that 400, I wanna push you a little bit and then bring you back. So we've trained that aerobic threshold, we're training that lactate threshold, and then, say, a few weeks down the road, we train a couple other things. We wanna train that VO2 max. So now I'm gonna say, I want you to be 30 seconds on, 90 seconds off, okay? So 30 seconds on, 90 off completely. I just want you to go as hard as you can for that 30 seconds. And then I want you to back off a little bit. I'm not gonna give you a pacing cue. I'm just gonna say, you know what? I don't care what this looks like. I just want you to go as hard as you can every single time so we can test that VO2 max out. That's how we would make the exchange there. So then we can start building in. And eventually, what we would want to see is this be, so if we're trying to raise VO2, we may want to see this come up a little bit. We may want to see it at 177, 178. This is really high and really fit. So say we want to get it up to 178, we would train that. But what I would really want to see is this to start coming down on that same heart rate. So say I still kept Jake at 175, but now He's at 175 at 6 minutes. Now he's just built fitness in. He can still maintain the same heart rate at a 6 minute. That's his new lactate threshold. Now he has built in the ability to be able to achieve a higher lactate threshold at a faster pace. He's just cut 15 seconds off his mile time, and now he's running 4 miles a minute faster. Does that make sense? Well, maybe not 4 miles, because that's only the mile time there, but, but if we played with that a little bit. All right, so specificity, we build it in for what we see here, okay? What we want to change, which one of these we want to change. It always goes back to these 3 variables: frequency, intensity, rest. Okay? And then, so when we talked about, we already kind of touched on this, and this is just one final piece I kind of want to say here as we run. What time do we have, you guys? Oh, we're doing good. Oh, it's 10:16. Never mind. We're going we're going too long. Okay, so time domains. Okay, so we go back to that hold on piece. It's a myth. It's not true. You can't do it, right? We see from these systems that if I go out on a workout as hard as I can and I try to hold on, I'm going to end up in that first set of pacing that we saw here, right? You're ultimately going to slow down. Your body can't handle that. It doesn't have the energy systems to be able to handle that. So we have to train those systems so you can be consistent over time, and if anything, finish stronger than you started, right? In runners, we see the same thing. We see a nice little bell curve, actually, with how runners go. If you talk about time, their speed over time, and if this is faster and this is slower, and you take let's take a 10K, right? Say this is a 10K. Over time, this is what we see from runners, that this is what happens, right? If this is faster, we go towards 0, and say we go towards a 7-minute mile here. This is what we tend to see, is that there's a peak where they slow down just a tad as a group or together, and then they pick it back up again. We're trying to figure out why some of this phenomenon happens actually psychologically, because there's runners out there that can hold it more like this the whole time. But that's how most people do, and that's what happens in CrossFit too. We're doing the same thing. There's this idea in our mind that we're holding on, but we're not holding on, because this is the time spectrum we have to deal with. If we're going hard, if the movement we're doing or the workout we're doing is less than 2 minutes, this is what we would call hold on and die. That's less than 2 minutes, okay? If you have less than 2 minutes, that's when you can hold on and die, because at least you'll get most of that system used up, right? But if it's anything more than 3 minutes, you have to pace. You have to pace yourself in some fashion, because your body, that's the only way that your body is going to be able to handle something over a longer period of time, okay? Or else we're gonna fizzle out. We don't wanna fizzle out. We wanna be constant, we wanna be strong through the whole workout, right? It's this area that's kind of tricky. That 2 to 3 minutes, that's when things get kind of tricky. That's the system where we can really go either way, and we need to know what the workout is and where our own bodies are to be able to play with this. We can manipulate that a little so you can transition a lot easier, or you can rest a lot easier into it, depending on what the movement is again. But this is the area that gets kind of gray with regards to if we need to pace or if we don't. It's almost like player's choice is what it becomes at that point, okay? And hazard score, we'll talk more about this when we talk about pacing, but that's basically back to what we were talking about with perceived pain versus actual pain, right? Pain is an emotion, slows our body down. It's not one of those things that we actually may have to, but the more we train at these intensities too, the more we adapt to that pain for your body to say, I felt this before. I know what this is. I recognize it, and I know that I can push through it. That's why we do threshold workouts so frequently in endurance, specifically for CrossFitters, because we want to learn how to use that threshold to our advantage, to be in a workout and doing thrusters, right? We're doing thrusters, but you're like, well, wait a minute. This heart rate that I feel right now and this movement that I feel, I felt that in running. I felt like I've pushed like this before, and I know that this is my threshold. That's what we talk about when we talk about finding your pacing, which is next time. When we talk about finding your pacing, you're like, oh, I feel this. I know how I can pace this out. I know that I can I can go faster on that end than this end. I know that that's my strength movement and this isn't my strength movement. We can also build, again, those non-strength movements and in with better rest, but again, we'll talk more about that on pacing. All right, you guys, I talked a lot. Are there any questions? Any? Yes, Yang.
So was it aerobic? You're using more fat as energy, right?
Yes.
What more fat loss do they say go for a hit rather than long periods of exercise?
So there's some conflicting information on that, right? Because they say these really high intensity exercises, yes, they get your heart rate up. Yes, you burn through carbohydrates. But these high intensity exercises, you're also going for 10 to 20 minutes, right? So you're tapping in to that fat burning mode here too. You're going to, whether you're running or whether you're doing high intensity or hit intervals. You're also doing a lot of muscle tearing during hit intervals because most of the time there's movements involved with weights or there's some type of strength piece to it, whether you're doing a row or a swing or something. So you are tearing your muscles up a bit. Muscle repair has to occur, right? And in order for muscle repair to occur, we have to have energy, we have to have amino acids, we have to have, so protein and the energy that comes in to replace and rebuild and all those kinds of things. So you're going to burn after a workout. That's what that accelerated burn piece is on there. But you're moving through really fast, so you have to burn high amounts of energy. Again, these are very, very high energy. This is lower energy, so you are burning through these stores. Especially when you get that heart rate so high that you have to do the whole whew thing.
And then I guess those are runners, but I guess they hold a higher percentage of fat versus someone who's a sprinter.
So essentially, so that's where it gets a little tricky, right? So runners will use fat for fuel, but not necessarily carry more fat. So runners will use fat to fuel the run, to fuel their distance, the frequency, volume, so on and so forth. But they don't want to be too heavy because heavy means slower, right? So they want to be as light as they can be. They want to strike that balance to having a higher type of fat diet. There's a great Dr. Tim Noakes from South Africa wrote a really good book called Running Lore. It's like 880 pages. It's huge. It's phenomenal though. It's so good. If I could recommend it to everybody to read that's a runner, I would recommend it to everybody. There's my recommendation for the day. Stamped and approved, okay? Dr. Tim Noakes talks about fat adaptation in runners and how beneficial it can be for them to use over the long run, but also playing with that delicate scale of not being undernourished while consuming a higher fat diet, because a lot of people that consume higher fat are like, well, it's a high energy product, right? So I must be getting the calories that I need, but that's kind of a trap you fall into, is that starts to happen. You still have to have a little bit, some carbohydrate in there. You know, we're starting to set minimums. So for women, we see usually below 150, 200 grams of carbohydrate a day is kind of dangerous. We try to keep them a little bit above that with really raw whole food sources. And for men, they can be about they can usually go a little bit lower. So like 175 to 150, 125. They found in these ketogenic diets that were a really big fad for a while, that when they started doing the studies, men could go a little bit lower without having any hormonal repercussions, unlike women who start to see a lot of kind of amenorrheic type stuff when they start to go a little lower. So bone density loss and hormonal fluctuations, loss of period, that kind of stuff. So. But generally, we don't want to restrict too low on that kind of stuff. So, answer your question? Good there? Okay. Any others? Anybody? All right, guys. Thanks for coming today. I appreciate you. Have a great rest of your day.